Good evening. My name is Phil Garcia. I'm a senior at Tulane studying finance and legal studies in business and formerly served as the president of Tulane's undergraduate student government. Tonight, we're pleased to have with us Adam Bryant and Rob Katz for a conversation on lessons in leadership with a Q&A session moderated by Professor Ambika Prasad, a Posse mentor, lecturer in management at the A.B. Freeman School of Business, and an adjunct professor in the Tulane Honors Program. Adam Bryant, creator of the New York Times' column Corner Office, is a Tulane parent whose daughter graduated from Tulane School of Public Health and Tropical Medicine in 2017. He has authored 3 leadership books based on the themes that emerged from his conversations with more than 600 CEOs, including his current work as managing director at Merryck Co, an executive mentoring and leadership development firm. Adam's newest book, The CEO Test, Master the Challenges That Make or Break All Leaders, is a no-nonsense insider's guide to navigating leadership's toughest challenges. Adam will conduct one of his senior interviews with Rob Katz, who's a parent to a current Tulane Business School student. Rob is the chairman of the board of directors and chief executive officer at Vail Resorts. Vail Resorts continues to rank among America's top employers. Katz currently serves on Wharton's leadership advisory board and has previously served on numerous private, public, and nonprofit boards. It is my pleasure to hand it off to Adam Bryant, creator of the New York Times' column Corner Office, in conversation with Rob Katz.
Great, thanks so much, Adolfo. Really looking forward to our time together. Rob, I do want to pack a lot in, so let's jump right in. And I do want to sort of acknowledge the moment that we're in now, that people are starting to look beyond the pandemic, but this has been, such a crisis, a leadership challenge. And I'm curious for you, like, what are the leadership lessons that you've learned over the last 14 months that you think you're going to take with you in the future?
Yeah, I appreciate that. And it is definitely something that's pretty front and present right at this moment as we're transitioning. And I'd say it's probably a few things. The first is leading through change. And change management. I think it's something we certainly talked a lot about for many years. It was a key part when we talk about innovation at our company. We really talk about how that's nothing more than change, and really being able to accept change, drive change, use change as a propeller for the company, not necessarily as something you resist. And I think, especially for our company, given the in-person experience that we were providing, in this last year, I think there were a massive number of changes that all of our folks across all of our resorts had to navigate through. And, I feel like that is something we learned how to do well and under the crisis, and it's something that we want to take forward. The other piece I would say is values. We went into this pandemic with a number of, values that we held dear at our company. One of them was safety, which is critical in the ski business. We really leaned into that value as we navigated through this year. And so I think as we come out of the pandemic, we almost feel like these values were even more important during a crisis, and therefore should absolutely be the cornerstone of how we navigate the company going forward. The last thing I would say is actually, I think the biggest leadership lesson was that leadership is critical. And last May, when it was completely unclear what this upcoming year would be like, I shared with the company that I wasn't sure whether our resorts would be able to open. I wasn't sure how profitable we would be able to be this coming year. But the one thing that we could all do was to improve upon our individual and collective leadership competencies. It's actually the thing I'm most proud of. And so I think coming out of this, we feel like that's, one of the most important values for us to use as our guide as we try and, experience and thrive in the post-pandemic environment.
Yeah. And it's always struck me that one of the, leadership is really hard for a lot of different reasons, but one of the main reasons it's hard is because it's just a series of balancing acts of, contradictions or paradoxes, if you will. And I think those really came into sharp relief during the crisis. I mean, there are times you had to be compassionate and understanding, but you also have to hold people accountable. You have to be optimistic and confident, yet also realistic about, the situation you were in. So just curious if you could reflect on how you think about those balancing acts.
Absolutely. And I do think one of the earlier books I'm sure that many of us read around leadership was from Jim Collins, in Good to Great, where he talks about kind of the tyranny of or and the genius of and. And I think that genius of and is around balancing these competing tensions. And so certainly going into this year, protecting employees, but also serving guests, right? Making the right investments around safety, but not knowing, of course, whether or not our resorts would be open or closed. I think, also when was it the right time to start thinking about post-pandemic, but not take our eye off the ball of actually running the company in the moment. And I completely agree with you. I think all of the work around communication, I actually think how we communicated individually as leaders and as a company was, never more important than this last year. And I think this balance of keeping people optimistic about the future, but very realistic about the true challenges that we were going through, and especially loss. I mean, there was a lot of grief, a lot of loss that, of course, not just at our company, around the world, everybody was going through. So we tried to use it as a place to pull out everybody's empathy rather than, kind of the other way where we just pretended everything was going to be fine. We tried to use it to engender discussion.
Right. And again, focusing on leadership, and what was the toughest leadership challenge for you over the past 14 months, the sort of Rubik's Cube that took you a while to solve?
Well, I think one of the biggest ones happened right away when last March, the pandemic was just getting going, and there was a lack of clarity as to whether we should keep operating our resorts. We had not gotten any notification from any government, any state and country that we had to shut down. Yet it seemed like there was this, brewing health crisis that, many of our resort towns have very small health services. And so we were a little bit, we're very much worried about overwhelming these health services. At the same time, we are the entire engine for these local communities. And so there was this real tension around, if we close down, that might do the right thing on the pandemic side. But of course, we knew nothing about pandemics. I certainly had no background in that versus, worrying about the economic impacts and worrying about the economic impacts for the entire industry. We ultimately decided to close. That was, one of the most gut-wrenching decisions I've ever made, given just the impacts to so many people. I think, post that, I think one of the toughest things we had to navigate going into this upcoming season was just uncertainty, right? Literally planning for a season where you had no idea whether you would be operating at all, what kind of investments do you make? And I would say that, even our food service, literally we went from having, 100 people in a restaurant that served 1,000 to having no one, to having people only outside, to having only takeout. And I think it was the agility piece, right? It was this kind of leadership tension of saying, you know what, we don't know what this is going to be like, and we're literally going to go with the flow in a way that we would normally never be able to succeed and thrive at. And that to me, I think as we went through this season was definitely the kind of, just sitting in uncertainty, not knowing what tomorrow was going to bring.
Yeah. I've been interviewing dozens of leaders over the last year about sort of the playbook they were writing in real time and the lessons they were learning. One of the common themes that has come up around talent is, people show up in a crisis often in ways that you don't expect. I mean, some people who you think would be rock stars kind of fade into the background. Other people really show up well. It's hard to predict. I'm just, any reflections from you on that?
Yeah, I think it was an important time actually for everybody in the company to showcase who they could be. And we talked about it very openly, again, last March and April and May, about how this was going to be a time where all of us had an opportunity to shine. And we did make it clear that we needed people who were going to help, right, during this crisis, that there was so many things that were going to be so challenging to people. We tried to make this distinction between, we don't want people to add drama to what's already a very dramatic situation. On the other hand, we do want people to show up with their emotions. And we tried to kind of say, hey, those are different. I would also say that we gave everybody an opportunity to kind of get their feet under them. So we didn't, go in there and say, 2 weeks into this crisis, how are people showing up? We said, hey, let's give this a few months. But after a few months, we started to see, pretty big divergence in how people really made an impact. And there were a number of people in our company that showed up in ways that made all the difference, right? In terms of how we were able to navigate. We had, 55,000 employees across our company in so many states and 3 countries. And these people were the backbone of how folks really were able to show up and have a job, and our guests to have the experience that they wanted. And there were others where this was not their moment. And I think, it's you never want to see it. You want to give those people as much empathy and support that you can, but it is important, right? And I do think a lot of the leaders, we just went through a whole round of leadership opportunities, numerous promotions, and a lot of those came out of the work that people did over these last 12 months. So your point about talent, I think, is a great one.
Right. And just at a personal level, what prepared you for leading in this crisis? I mean, have you been through previous crises? Was there something earlier in your life that gave you the resilience and the kind of like steady hand?
I was CEO during the 2008-2009 crisis, the recession, but this certainly, I think worldwide obviously was a much bigger deal given the health impacts. And I think for our company, because we were in person, was much tougher. I think for me, I felt like what was critical for me in my role was to realize that I had to lead in a systemic way, right? That even though I, of course, was going to be empathetic and I was going to take in the issues that any employee was going through, I had to keep my mind on the whole. And it's something that, I think I've been practicing because our company has grown quite a bit over the last decade. And so, I've been thinking about the difference between kind of empathy and compassion. Empathy is like, I'm feeling your feelings, I'm taking them on. And I think, earlier in my career, that felt like, no, that emotions were important. And it was important to be able to meet people where they were. But I started to kind of morph a little bit over the last few years into compassion, right? How do I show up with compassion for everyone, but I don't take on anyone's individual challenge because the company's too big and the problems were so wide. And I do think that was critical over the last 12 months. And helped keep, because I had to maintain, like every leader, right, my own energy. It's you can't just be there for everyone else without somehow rejuvenating. And this, but it's a tension, right, to figure out like, how do I show up for everybody, but also not miss the right feedback and the right connections one-on-one.
Yeah. Everybody talked about, even before the pandemic, the importance of like agility and embracing ambiguity. And it was a little hypothetical before, we've lived through this very real case study of it. And I'm curious in what ways has that sharpened your antenna when you are hiring somebody, let's say as a direct report for your leadership team? Walk us through the process. I mean, let's assume the table stakes of competency at their skill. What are the X factors that you're looking for, and how do you get at those in the interview?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we're really focused on is this piece around agility. And I think one of the things we've learned over time is it's not enough to ask people about their agility and have them tell you how agile they are. You need to hear stories, right? You need to tell me a time where something was going wrong or there was a mini crisis. How did you navigate it? Tell me exactly what happened. What did you say to, your direct reports in that moment? We in our minds, right, it's an axiom that, of course, yes, it's this hypothetical that everybody talks about, but in the last 12 months became clear. We need people who are comfortable with change, right? And even the smallest resistance, right, when you pile it up over many, many employees, can really hold a company back. And so I would say that's certainly number one. Two is this piece around emotional intelligence. So as you said at the outset, right, leaders today, I think, had to show up with, right, a range of emotions. They had to be able to portray a range of emotions and be able to decipher a range of emotions that were coming from their direct reports. And so this piece around emotional intelligence or emotional agility is also quite critical. And again, we're looking for stories and specifics from people that really showcase what we call kind of demonstrated potential, not just that they passed an IQ test or something, but show how you solve those challenges. The other piece I'd say is ambition. I think it's something that we're talking quite a bit about in our company. And a piece of ambition in my mind is grit. And there's no doubt that getting through the last 14 months required grit. It required folks who realized that this was a marathon. This was going to go on for a long time. And they had to have the tenacity and the energy and the motivation, I think, to succeed in that environment. And so all of those things I feel like have become more sharp, and we're trying to be more rigorous around in terms of who we hire.
Yeah, that's great. And just sticking with the interviewing theme, I mean, you gave us a sense, let's say you were interviewing me for a direct report position. I just got a sense of what you would be asking me. Let's say I turned the tables on you and said, Rob, if I were to come work for you, if you were going to be my boss, can you give me a sense of what you're like as a boss? Like, what am I, over 6 months, I'm going to find out all your quirks, and we're all human beings, so we all have them. Like, what are your pet peeves? What's going to earn an extra gold star for me? Like, what kind of boss are you like?
Yeah, well, I would say, one piece I would say that I say about myself, but I think is something that we try and embody, for the company is that if you come at work for Vail Resorts, or you're working for me, the good news is we're not going to forget about you. So you're never going to wake up one day and find yourself in the corner where nobody knows who you are or what you're doing. The bad news is we're not going to forget about you. So we are thinking about you. And I do tell anyone who's certainly going to work for me that I'm going to be thinking about you and how you're doing all the time. And if that's uncomfortable, then yeah, that's probably not I'm not the right boss. This is probably not the right place, because we really have this focus around leadership that it's a constant evolution, right? It's like a lifelong learning, continuous improvement. You've really got to be up for that kind of almost, true self improvement plan. Not because we think everybody, isn't amazing as they are today, but it's that energy that I think, really plays well. I do want people, transparency, values orientation, no politics. That's just not, everyone needs to show up with a company first mentality, including me, and it's not to say that we're not individually important, but we really like people who are here to do their best work in the moment. And that leadership is ultimately about your impact on others. And so if you're going to work for me, I'm going to spend probably 50% of our one-on-one time talking about your team. What's going on with your team? What's going well? What's not going well? What's going on with their teams? So there's going to be a heavy focus on people, not just the numbers and strategy. And that's something people have to get comfortable with.
Yeah. I like your point about how we're all works in progress, and leadership is this sort of infinite challenge to always get better. So given that, what are you working on? What do you want to be better at as a leader 2 years from now than you are today?
Yeah, I think one of the toughest things for me has been moving from a doer to a manager, to a leader. I'm somebody who's very comfortable rolling up my sleeves and getting involved in the details and getting really, into the ins and outs of something. And as the company has grown, I've really had to continue to step back and play a completely different role. And so that continues to be, and even though I feel like I'm making progress, every week, every month that goes by, I'm like, wait a minute, I got to take another big step back. I need to have my teams and their teams do more throughout the company. So I think that's certainly one. Two is I've had to accept, my role as a figurehead a little bit, which, honestly, again, given my background, I always viewed figureheads as, kind of worthless and, they're not doing anything, and a role, I wanted to, again, be in there in the mix of things. But I've had to realize that leadership is about using yourself and inspiring and motivating. I'm more of an introvert. I've had to learn over time, no, I need to lean into my, extrovert competencies. I will say during the pandemic, the one slight positive for me was, well, my introvert got to, hide out in my house for a long time. And actually I would say, it was about last April or May, I realized, wait a minute, I'm getting into the bunker here, right? I need to get out, even though I couldn't see anybody in person. I needed to communicate on video. I needed to communicate to the company. But I'd say my initial instinct was, to go into hiding.
Yeah, that's great. And as it's always good to meet a fellow introvert. So we should create a club, and then we won't go to it because we're introverts. But it's an introvert as a CEO. It doesn't quite fit the sort of classical image of a CEO, like charismatic and all that. And I am intrigued. So if you could share with the audience a bit, because you have an incredibly public job. I mean, you spend a lot of your days communicating with groups, large, small, et cetera. Like, how do you manage your energy as an introvert?
I come home and I'm watching a lot of Netflix. No, I've really made sure that I've been very deliberate about my personal life as well, right? In focusing, it's one of the things I said, actually, when I first took the job back in 2006, that if I wanted to be a good CEO, a good husband, and a good father, that was going to be a really tall order. And if I could do all three of those, then there's probably not going to be a lot of room for a lot of other things that I can do. And so I really am thoughtful about that. I would say, inside the company, I'm thoughtful about my time. I try and be present in the moment when I'm connecting with somebody, but also have boundaries. So I don't think, I know a lot of CEOs will say, well, they have an open door policy. Anybody can come in, they'll talk to anybody in a moment. Yes, in theory, but no, I need to, make sure that I have some quiet time to be able to replenish for myself. And I try, it's a little bit of this systemic approach, right? I try not to rally for a public event. I try and just get myself in a mode that I understand that I'm on display for this time period, during the day, during the week, and exercise, read, started playing guitar during the pandemic, finding some meditative, including meditative things that actually give me, my energy back.
Right. So are you going to play a song for us right now? Is that the?
No, I think maybe in 5-10 years.
Okay. We'll get back together for that. Let's shift gears. And I often think about this moment, sort of imagine all of us 50 years from now, and of course we're all still alive, but somebody sits down to write a book of the history of the American corporation. And I think 50 years from now, when they're looking back over the decades, I have to think they'd have to devote, probably 3 or more chapters to this incredible moment we're living in right now. It's been transformational for leadership. It's been transformational for how work is, gets done and is going to be done. And I also think it's been transformational for about the role of companies in society. CEOs are emerging more and more as sort of politicians. A lot of societal challenges are rolling up to the front door of companies. And I'd love to hear how you think about that.
Yeah, I think the best companies have a unique culture. And I think to develop culture, I think that what's happened during the time frame that we're talking about, not only over the last year, but maybe over the last 5 to 10 years, is an appreciation, I think, across corporate America of how important emotions are, right, to creating the right culture. And I think if you want to inspire and motivate people to do their best work, I don't think you can only think about the dollars and cents of somebody's job or the work that you're doing. You've got to motivate people in other ways. And I do think standing up, it's one of the things that certainly came through for us during the pandemic, is standing up for your values. And I think being willing to talk about the things that are important to you that maybe not everyone agrees with you on. Certainly diversity, equity, and inclusion became for everybody, but at our company, right, an even greater focus, right, as to what we stood for, not just in the kind of pablum or the blanket statement, but what did it really mean internally? And so I agree with you. I think that the companies that will succeed going forward are going to have things that they stand for. It's not just going to be kind of mealy mouth corporate speak. I think, and especially I think the generation that's coming up right now and into the workforce, even more passionate about issues in general, but certainly social issues. And I think they're looking for companies that align with that. And again, you may not align with everybody. So I think when people look back, I know there's a lot of debate going on right now about whether companies should weigh into the political sphere. And, that's maybe for another conversation, but I think companies should take stands on issues, not every issue, but issues that are somehow core to them or important to them, not because it's not because of what the CEO feels, it's that actually the board, the CEO, the management team have decided these are things that are critical to our actual business success. So I think people will look back on this moment for that and that transformation.
Yeah. And one of the many reasons I think the CEO job is getting tougher is, just to build on the point we've just been discussing, I think a growing number of employees feel like they should not only have a voice, but maybe even a vote in the company's sort of policies and decisions, right? We saw at Hachette Publishing, the editors said, we're not publishing Woody Allen's memoir, and they walked out. And ultimately the company relented. And we're seeing more of that. And a lot of that, I think, is manifested in, if we imagine sort of an old school all hands meeting when everybody was there in person, but, the CEO, you're on the stage and then the hands start going up during Q&A. It's like, what about this? What about that? And I'm just curious, how do you think CEOs should handle the growing number of what about questions that may not have anything to do with the company's business, but it's like, what are we doing about the Amazon rainforest? How do you address that?
I think you have to, goes back to maybe this value point, right? Which is, so for us, the environment, for instance, is very important because of course the product we're selling is the environment, it's the outdoors. And so of course we've leaned into the environment quite a bit, but that doesn't mean we can tackle every environmental issue. And so I do think we spend a lot of time as an executive team and with broader groups within the company talking about these issues. I spend time personally talking to employee groups, and it helps inform, right, the kind of decisions we can make. Because with 55,000 employees, yeah, you could have 55,000 issues, right, that people want to talk about. And I'm happy to talk about them, and if I have a view, but I think when the company is speaking, right, or I'm speaking for the company, no, it has to be just like our strategic priorities, right? You have to narrow down your strategic priorities to only a couple of things to be successful. And I think on this list of values and social issues, you have to do the same. You can't be for every, thing, and can't put yourself in that, or you probably won't make progress on any of them.
Yeah. Just staying with the sort of the challenge of the CEOs for a second, another hypothetical. Let's say you're on a cross-country flight. Remember those? Everybody remember those? But you're sitting down, somebody sits down next to you, spark up a conversation. And the person sitting next to you is about to take their first CEO job, about to start their first CEO job. And they say to you, like, Rob, like, I kind of have a theory of what the job is like, but what do I need to know that I don't know? What would you tell them?
Well, so it's funny you said that because I actually got that piece of advice. So when I became CEO of our company, we had a guy on our board named Bill Stewart, who at that point was the chairman of Ralston Purina. And he said to me, this was his only piece of advice. He said, Rob, being CEO is not a popularity contest. And it was an interesting piece of advice. I mean, at the time, I'm not sure I fully understood what he was saying, but I think over time I have, which is, I think leadership in general, and certainly being a CEO, it's this tension. You can't go into it because you want to be liked, especially in roles, and for us, we have a unique company where we have this huge responsibility for our mountains, and our communities, and there's so many people who are passionate about our business. You have to realize that not everything you do is going to go over well. And especially if you want to be an agent of change, right? You can't take polls to figure out whether you're doing well. But on the other hand, I've also learned that you also can't bring people along to affect change unless you're aligned with them. And so I do what I would share is that is the navigation that you have to figure out in that tension and the back and forth of, you need to figure out what you believe in, but you also have to constantly be getting feedback, not just from your board, not just from your shareholders, from your community stakeholders, from your employees. You need to figure out, like, where can you bring all of these people, right? You can't just make it up by yourself and hope they follow you. But I do think it starts with, it's not, if you want to wake up every day with just people singing your praises, it's probably not the right job.
So let's go back to your early years. Help us understand how Rob became Rob. I mean, what were you, what were important early influences for you? What were you doing outside of class when you were a kid? Just help us figure out how you became CEO and what were the early roots of that?
Well, I graduated from Wharton undergrad, and so was passionate about business from kind of an early age. I went into investment banking and worked in a private equity firm in New York when they, had first started, and spent a lot of time, I think, on the, kind of Excel spreadsheet part of leadership, understanding analytics. But I would say one of the things I took from that was when I was in private equity, we'd make investments. Not all of the investments went well. And one of the things I learned was how to deal with when what you recommend goes poorly. And I do think in corporate America, that's a challenge, right? A lot of leaders struggle with anything going poorly, but actually you can't have things go well if you're not willing to take risks that things go poorly. But along the way, I think one of the things that I took away from that experience was there was a little more focus for me on the numbers and not as much focus on the people. And so my wife and I kind of made a decision that we were going to leave right after 9/11 to said, you know what, we're ready to make a change. And so we moved our family and our two very young kids at the time to Boulder, Colorado. And that was back in 2002. And then for a couple of years, I spent time getting involved with leadership training and doing all kinds of kind of how do you lead a group? How do you interact in a group? And one of the big things that came up was feedback. How do you give people candid feedback? And I started to realize that I wasn't good at any of that stuff. And so I really, spent, while I was doing some consulting work for my prior firm, I really started to spend time on that. And decided that, the people side of the business was what drew me in the most. And when I was on the board of Vail from 1996, and when my predecessor left in 2006 and they invited me to come on, that was a big motivator for me was not just, it wasn't the financial piece. It was really the piece of, could I be part of a culture? Because that's what kind of keeps me motivated. It's what keeps me motivated today. How do you solve? I actually think solving people, how do you motivate them? How do you get them to do their best work? I think is the most complex strategic question.
Oh, that's great. And indulge me while I push the timeline earlier in your life, but like take us back when you were like middle school, high school. What were you doing outside of class? What were your parents like? Early influences? What was sort of when the Rob concrete was still wet? Like what shaped you?
My dad is a lawyer and was a lawyer when I was growing up. My mom was an artist. And I do think that that those two kind of influences really made me who I am. And I think provided, visual arts was not something that I was ever quite good at. But I think I learned over time, especially over the last 15, 20 years, is that my artistry and creativity comes out through work and through business. And so I do see myself as a real blend for the two of them. When I was in high school, part of the math team, debate team, mock trial team. I was a big fan of arguing. We had growing up, everything was a debate. Everything, a lot of chatter at the dinner table, a lot of chatter with our larger family. And I think that has served me well. It's also a bit of an issue. Some people, you have to realize not everybody likes to argue. You have to kind of adjust your style, but I think my willingness to kind of in my head at least go back and forth between different issues, really push and pull them, I don't feel is a problem or an annoyance. I feel like it's something that I embrace, and so I do think I've kind of tried to pull that forward a little bit.
That's great. Last question from me before I turn it over to Ambika and all the audience questions. But what is your best career and life advice to Tulane grads?
I think, when I often talk to folks who are, just graduating college or just graduating from, an MBA, if they're earlier in their career, a lot of times, people perseverate around, oh, should I take this job or that job? What about as if like the job you're going to take right out of school is, the end in and of itself. And people worry about where that will lead them in their career. And one of the pieces of advice that I give them is actually a piece of advice that I got. Coming out of college, joined an investment bank called Drexel Burnham. When I joined, Drexel Burnham was under investigation. And I had a couple of other job offers. And I went out on one of those selling dinners where a vice president at Drexel looked, I said, why would I join here? You're under investigation. He looked at me and said, you know what, you seem like a smart kid. This isn't going to matter. There are a lot of smart people. This is an amazing environment. If this, firm doesn't pan out, you're going to do just fine. And I took the leap and actually went to the firm. And as you probably remember, it went bankrupt literally 18 months after I was there and I was fired. But he was right? The environment and the group of people that was there, I had so much learning and made so many connections that it actually worked out for me for the rest of my career. So I always tell people, don't overthink it, especially earlier in your career. Like, where do you genuinely feel? Not what you think is the right decision. What do you feel? Who is when you got a chance to meet people, when you got a chance to go inside the company, how did you experience that? If you felt motivated, if you felt connected, go with it and learn. And honestly, I still feel like I'm learning every day in my job. And that's really all that the most important piece of advice. Go somewhere where you will learn. The rest of your career will kind of play out from there.
Great. Well, I could talk to you all day, Rob. This has been wonderful. I don't want to hog the microphone. Ambika, do you want to come on video and share some of the audience questions?
Sure. Thank you so much, Adam and Rob, for a very engaging conversation. I was particularly interested when Rob spoke about the introverted leader and emotional intelligence, because those are things that we discuss in our class a lot. especially introversion as a trait in a leader. So yes, let's get to the questions. And the first one is from Kate Johnson. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. And the question is, can you speak to empathy versus compassion? And then further, does compassion demand action, or are you just there to listen?
So I think, again, and I'm not the expert on either, but I would say that how I've defined it for myself is, I think empathy is, as in contrast to compassion, is when you're with somebody, and I do see this in leaders, especially as they're, moving from kind of a supervisor to a manager to a director, vice president, all of a sudden the number of people that they're managing grows. When you have only a couple of people that you're managing, yes, you can have a pretty in-depth, deep, right, connection and relationship where you can be incredibly empathetic and go deep and understand each person on their own. When you have 50 people, 100 people, 200 people, 50,000 people, 1 million people, with some of the biggest companies, I think it shifts a little bit. And at that point, you have to see yourself as a leader, as being there for the whole group, the whole department, the whole company. And so I'd say on compassion, I think it is certainly both. That ultimately, right, the company needs to take actions that are compassionate. But I'm kind of when I was describing it, I was really saying, when you're sitting with somebody or a group of people, yeah, you need to be able to show up in a way where you are thinking about your impact to them. You are thinking about the issues that are on their mind. But then you can go to the next meeting after that, right, and do exactly the same thing all over again, and the meeting after that, and the meeting after that, and the week after that. And I think as leaders get more responsibility, often that tires them out. And so to maintain their own sustainability, I think they've got to find a spot where, no, you can be essentially be on almost, compassion in my mind is almost permanent empathy. And yeah, I think on the action side, I think that, yeah, companies have to act with compassion. They have to understand that what their impact is going to be, which I think is maybe the most important piece that not everybody does, or not all companies do. But sometimes it's also true that companies have to make tough decisions that won't always please everyone. Thanks.
Yeah. Like you said, leadership is not a popularity contest. All right, so the next question is from Evan Nicole. And this is a question for Rob again. In our undergraduate leadership class, as part of the SLAM SICE program, we talk about the importance of resilience in crisis leadership, particularly having an internal locus of control. Did you find this was an important attribute over the last year? And how did you manage to accomplish that?
Yeah, I think a really important point, which is, I did feel, obviously through the pandemic, like I think everyone in the world did, that there was a lot of things happening very much outside of your control, things there was a tremendous amount of uncertainty and things you couldn't do anything about. And for me personally, and I think at the company, we started talking about having some grace. Meaning understanding that there are things you cannot control and not expending too much energy on that. On the other hand, there are things you can control. And I do think this is a challenge that people sometimes face, which is when there are a lot of things that they can't control, they think everything is out of control. But actually there are things you can control. And so to focus on that. And I do think this, being present also, what can I do today? It's true that I don't know what's going to happen a month from now or 6 months from now, but what can I do today, even planning for 3 months from now, without, perseverating over, I don't know what's going to happen. I'm not sure what's going to go on. It's like, how can you be present? If you can be present with yourself, I think you can be present with your team. And that I think will keep them grounded. And it was a strong message that we sent to everybody. I'd say on a personal level, I think habits, I definitely got into a work routine that I always had, but I think I had to, kind of lean into it even more during the pandemic. So exercise or meditation, how I was eating, what I was doing with my time that I was not, on a Zoom meeting, which was most of the day, but even 5 minutes, did I walk outside? Did I, maybe take my lunch in the sun outside if it was warm instead of, being inside. I mean, even small things I think made a difference. And we talked a lot about in our company, this above the line and below the line on resilience. So were you above the line, meaning you were, getting yourself up every day and somehow rejuvenating, or were you below the line, meaning that no, you were going in the wrong direction? And then what were the support systems that you could get to actually get yourself what we called again above the line? And just talking about that, removing the stigma, right, from throughout the company that everyone was expected to be perfect through this pandemic, I think was important.
Thanks. The next question is from Henry Ritchie. As we emerge from this pandemic, what are the things that keep you up at night? And what are the things that get you excited?
I think the things that keep me up at night are, I think there were challenges that we were facing as a company and as an economy before the pandemic hit. I think, making sure that we had the right workforce, enough people in the workforce, the right workforce for the future, the right educational opportunities, the right upskilling of people. All of these are things, I think, challenges, honestly, with our immigration, approach to immigration at the time. So I think all of these are things that actually we need to address as an economy if we want to continue to grow. And I think for our company, many of these things which maybe were suspended a little bit during the pandemic, things like affordable housing, which is an issue, certainly not just in our communities, but around the country. But those issues I don't think have gone away. And I think they're going to come back, and we need to be out front on all of these to make sure we don't fall behind or get complacent. What excites me the most is I think that we learned as a company, maybe even for me as a leader, that we have more capacity than we think. There's more that we can do. I think getting through this pandemic, which was nobody probably could have scripted. I think this felt so out of a movie. But yet we were able to navigate through it as a company and able to navigate it as a team. And I think that now, okay, we're not going to hopefully have to spend as much time on pandemics and public health, hopefully in the years to come. What do we do with that capacity? Right? How do we reinvent, reimagine parts of our company to do amazing things for our guests and our employees? That's what's most exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
So next question is from actually Adolfo. So Adolfo, I'm going to let you ask it yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Prasad. Rob, I know I and all of the students on this call really appreciate your insight and advice. That being said, culturally, and I think pertinent to this conversation, millennials and Gen Zers highly prioritize equity, diversity, and inclusion. In your experience, how can young people today identify firms, jobs, and opportunities that align with their personal priorities?
I think it's a great question, and something that we spent, we've done a lot of thinking about, I think, over the last year. I'd say, one of the things that I'm most proud about, at our company and in my tenure as CEO is building gender diversity. Unfortunately, the ski industry has been an industry dominated by men. I think when I came in as CEO, there were maybe no women running any resorts almost anywhere in the world, which is it's kind of hard to believe. And we understood that for our business to succeed, we needed to have the best talent. You can't have the best talent if you're excluding half the people, right, in the world. And we've done, I think, some amazing things on that front, in terms of building our gender diversity at all levels, in operations, in leadership positions, in our corporate environment, on our board. And I'm super proud of that. But I think last June, like a lot of people, I think it became clear to me that while I was so busy doing that, I had completely ignored the fact that we had done nothing on racial diversity. And so when you look at our company and our sport and our communities, we are woefully behind on racial diversity. And so again, we've made a lot of progress with women, but white women, right? Very few women of color, men of color. And I think it's caused me to really have to take stock of why that is. And I think we've spent the better part of the last year really talking about that. What I would say though, is my advice piece, we admitted that we had a problem, and we admitted that this was not going to be a quick solution, right? And what we said was we wanted to make sure that inside of our company, we were going to be willing to have the tough conversations about why, not just run ahead to the solution. But actually build the engagement so that when people come to the company, they understand that it's not just that we care about diversity and are trying to move the needle on it, but that because you could try and build diversity, but if you don't have inclusion, if you don't have equity, if you don't have buy-in for why inclusion and equity are important, then I don't think that's a sustainable change. And so, I think people should look for companies where those conversations are happening, that there's room to have like a real conversation. And by the way, there are hard decisions and hard policy choices to actually move the needle on DEI. And I think it just starts with, being authentic about it. Thanks.
I appreciate those points. And I guess the vulnerability that you bring to the table in that, having those conversations with your company. And I know everyone on the call probably does as well.
Thanks so much. I appreciate that.
Fo, do you have a question for Adam as well? I believe you do.
Not at this time, unfortunately.
Not at this time, but I was
I'm an introvert. That's okay.
Answer a question. Maybe I should start asking questions.
All right, at a later time. Martin Hoffman has a question. During your career, has your personal integrity conflicted with professional integrity decisions? And the second part of this question is, and if so, what is your best practice to resolve that conflict?
Yeah, I think I would say no. I've never had a situation where I felt like my personal integrity was somehow in conflict with a decision that we were making as a company. There's no doubt that I may have a lot of personal emotions. I may personally agree or disagree with some things that we do. I may, if I were running the company and I owned 100% of it, maybe I would take different actions, but it was never at an integrity level, because I think the company should never put people in that position. Now, there are tough decisions that you have to make, I think, as any leader, right? So sometimes you do have to make a talent decision where you have to let somebody go for whatever reason. And for some people, that's very difficult, and they feel like somehow that violates their personal integrity. But I've always felt like, that the emotion comes up when you have to make a tough call that is going to negatively impact somebody. But that's actually part of the role and part of the job, and it's actually part of me making sure that I'm thinking about everyone in the company. When it comes to being transparent, when it comes to lying or fraud or any of these things that or looking the other way when you see issues of racism or sexism, there can be no place for that. I don't know. I would like to think that everyone in our company who works there would have the same answer as me. It's a big company. It's hard to say, but that's certainly our goal, is not to put people in a position where their personal integrity and values have to be called into question.
Well said. Thanks. The next question is again for Rob. You spoke a lot about engaging in an ongoing path of learning and development throughout your career. So what are some of the things you do every day to make sure you're always learning, developing, and growing?
One, I think reading obviously is incredibly critical. One of the things I share throughout the company is, people sometimes wonder, well, what book is the company saying that we should read on leadership? Or now it's going to be Adam's book, but no, but I do tell people, right there, like, you can find out there so many opportunities for you to improve yourself on the internet, in books, in magazines, that has to be just part of your daily routine. And you should not wait for the company to actually give you, feed you that information. Sure, I may have my views, but it isn't, but that actually being a lifelong learner means you're constantly soaking in information. And we live at a time where the amount of information that's available to us, right, is endless. And so anyway, that's certainly one. Two, though, is some stillness. I do think that, if you keep yourself just busy all day long and you don't have quiet time, that those thoughts won't get deep enough, right, to actually make a difference in you as a leader. So I think that's another piece. The third piece is you need to receive feedback and input from other people. So you need to be open to that, to realize that, whether it's guests who email me, whether it's things I might read online that are not always that pleasant, whether it's hearing from employees or my team members at the company, whether it's hearing from my wife or my kids, my family, right? Everybody is providing some piece of feedback. And sometimes it feels good, sometimes it doesn't. But if you can see each one of those interactions as, an opportunity to just get in some information and use that to help develop who you are, I think that's kind of the true day-to-day practice, for me at least.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah. Next question is for Adam. What piece of your new book is most applicable to this generation of talent, those who want to be CEOs but have a few steps ahead of them?
Sure. By now I've interviewed probably more than 700 leaders, and through all those interviews, I'm always, the way my brain works, I'm always looking for the patterns, right, and asking myself questions like, what are the habits of mine that help explain why these people from all different backgrounds get to the corner office. And I've really come to appreciate that a core skill of effective leaders is this ability to simplify complexity. And, would take whatever complexity they're facing, for Rob, it's the industry, it's the company strategy, and to be able to distill that down to, for lack of a better term, like a simple plan. People talk a lot about strategy in business, but I've really come to appreciate that word is a bit problematic. It's almost like an ink blot or Rorschach test. It means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And so I think people, as they are, starting in their careers, maybe 20s or 30s, but just really look for people who simplify complexity well. And it's not that big a club, but recognize when it's not done well, when it is done well, and always try and practice it themselves. If try and just create a forcing function, a discipline for yourself to always keep simplifying. And there's a big difference between simplifying complexity and oversimplifying complexity. And it's a definite sweet spot, but I think the more that you watch for it and try and practice it yourself, that's going to pay off long-term in, whatever you do, whatever walk of life.
I totally agree with that. And I think it's an incredible insight. And it is exactly what you said, right? The challenge of not oversimplifying. But I think, especially when you're earlier in your career, and I see a lot of younger leaders think that like data itself is the answer. And I think, honestly, I think in your book, actually, you do a great job of highlighting this point about culling down, saying no, being focused. It's hard. Yeah.
And it requires a conscious counterweight because, in the field of business, there is a bit of a like more is better bias. Like if you should think about 50 things, to be a better leader, want another 50 as well. And to sometimes reach for the $20 word when a 5-cent word is actually better. So just kind of recognize, and ultimately to me it's kind of about critical thinking, right? To always be questioning. And all of these are related, right? The Venn diagram, sort of the relentless questioning, simplifying complexity, looking for the patterns. But again, that if you build that muscle, that's going to pay off in every single job, and it's really going to set you apart because a lot of people struggle with that skill.
Mm-hmm.
So we are almost drawing to a close, but I have one question for both of you, and very briefly, what according to you is the difference between a manager and a leader? Anyone can go in first.
I'll start. I think with a manager, somebody in effect gives you a certain amount of resources, and it's your job to maximize those resources in terms of talents. And I think leadership is much more about creating a vision. And I don't mean like capital V, but like having a clear plan that like inspires people, that not only touches them emotionally, that gets at the why they would want to do it, but also says like this ambitious plan that get everybody sign up for and be clear on where we're going and how we're going to work together as we get there. It's going to be hard, but we're going to have some fun. I think it's, brings in much more of that sort of aspirational and emotional components.
Yeah, I agree with that. And, maybe I would say, I think, as a manager, the truth is for all of us, we all have to be managers, and that there's a lot of day-to-day responsibilities in leading people. There's a lot of day-to-day responsibilities in getting people to do their jobs. And that is the day-to-day piece around management. And we can never let go of that. That is an important part, right? If people don't have the tools to actually do their job, if they don't have the tools to, function day-to-day in the company, right, they won't be good. So that's critical. But I agree in terms of leading is that people are following you, right? They're not just listening to you because you're their boss, they're following you. And I do think it comes back a little bit to what Adam was saying about simplifying complexity. And one of the main reasons for it is you ultimately, when you're solving these problems, you have to communicate that to other people. They have to be able to hear it and then do something with it. And I do think that often, we can overload people. People they want to follow a leader who's created a picture, right, that's alluring to them, that's compelling to them, where they think that they will be better leaders themselves if they follow. And that's, we can all think about it. That's never about somebody who just data dumps on you. It's about somebody who's created a picture of what they stand for. And so that simplifying piece, I think, stands for data in general. It also stands for simplifying who you are and why people should follow you as that leader. And it's a lifelong journey, to make that happen.
Yeah. And I love the point that Rob made earlier, just about like this past year has been a moment for everybody to double down on sort of leadership. And, even if your role is an effective manager, I mean, I've always loved that expression, lead from your seat, wherever you are, even if you're not managing people, like you have a leader potential to lead and a leadership responsibility.
Yes, those are very good points. So it's 6:28. Our session is almost drawing to a close now. So Adam and Rob, if you have any final closing thoughts, we would love to hear from you, and then we shall wrap up.
Sure. I'll start by just saying, I think, it's an amazing moment, I think, that we've all just lived through. And, I think we don't even know the ways that this last year plus is going to impact all of us. And I think there are many challenges that, of course, everybody's facing in terms of what happened this last year, and a lot of loss, but there's huge opportunity. And I think that, my closing maybe piece of advice to everybody is be open to it. Don't just rush forward to put the pandemic behind you and pretend like it never happened. Keep it, yes, let's move forward. Let's obviously focus on what's coming next, but let's make sure we all realize we've been through something quite unique. In many cases, right, people are saying it's a 100-year event. And so as tough as it was, I also think, right, we've all probably been changed for it. And I would encourage everybody to let that in and see how you can be a little bit different, how you can lead in a little bit of a different way, over the next couple of years.
Yeah. And I'll just say, first off, thanks to Rob. I mean, love all of your stories and insights. That above the line, below the line, you just burned that into my brain. I think that's a great framework. And I think a big theme from this conversation has been about sort of mindset and attitude. And we've all been through this crisis. And I'll share a very quick story just personally. But 6 weeks into the pandemic, I was interviewing a CEO. And, personally, I was feeling kind of knocked back and down by the whole event. And she framed it in very simple physics terms. She said, disruptions cause energy, they cause motion. And it's just like, the moment she said that, it's like this switch flipped in my brain. It's like, yeah. So then the question is, how do you take advantage of that energy that's created by that disruption? And it's just, I think to me, like the lasting challenge from the pandemic that we can all take going forward is just to see everything as an opportunity. Every challenge is also an opportunity, and that's ultimately about its sort of mindset and attitude.
Thanks. I appreciate it, Adam. And I appreciate, just getting the chance. I've read your column for years, and it's incredible. And I appreciate your willingness to do this and Tulane's willingness to put this on for everybody.
Yeah,
really
thank
you.
Amen.
Thanks, Adam. Thanks, Rob, for your time, for your insights. And thank you so much to the audience for participating. Everyone have a nice evening.